Hey, folks, welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. Kentucky is a land shaped by contrast. Its cities look toward the modern world, while beyond them lie miles of farmland, wooded ridges, limestone caves, isolated creek bottoms, and Appalachian hollows where darkness can feel absolute. Now, in those places, stories travel differently. They pass between relatives, hunters, farmers, and neighbors. Some are told openly. Others remain hidden for decades, shared only when a witness finally decides the risk of ridicule is less important than the need to speak. Now, many of these stories can undoubtedly be traced to the ordinary wildlife, changing light, fear, memory, or natural human desire to give a mysterious event a memorable shape. A black bear standing upright can appear almost human. A bobcat's cry can sound unnatural in the darkness. An owl's crossing a road in the wrong angle can become something enormous and winged. But some accounts resist those easy explanations. They involve more than a fleeting shadow. They include multiple witnesses, repeated encounters, unusual behavior, physical traces, missing time, or descriptions that seem to belong not to one known animal, but to several different creatures combined. Tonight, we traveled into the unexplained side of the Bluegrass State. Our journey begins in the Appalachian foothills of Harlan County, where stories of ghosts, Bigfoot, and mountain monsters have circulated for generations. From there, we follow reports of Bearilla, a white-haired giant, the legendary Sheepsquatch, tiny winged beings, a towering roadside apparition, and humanoid creatures lurking much closer to home. Our final account takes us to a farm near Falmouth, where a man searching for trespassers claimed to encounter three completely different entities, a doorway filled with light, and several hours of his light that he could never explain. Now, the following accounts are presented as they were reported. They are testimony, not proof, and the interpretations remain open. Yet, whether these stories describe unknown animals, folklore made visible, altered perception, or something outside our present understanding, they have one thing in common. The people who experienced them never looked at the Kentucky wilderness in quite the same way again. Welcome to Unexplained, Kentucky. Now, our first account comes from Bailey's Creek in Harlan County in the foothills of eastern Kentucky. The witness grew up surrounded by what local people sometimes called booger stories. tales of hauntings, Bigfoot, Dogman, and other things said to wander the mountains. The witness writes, where I grew up, nearly everyone seemed to have a relative with an extraordinary story. Someone's uncle had seen a Bigfoot while hunting. Someone's aunt had encountered a ghost inside the old high school. With so many stories circulating, it was not always easy to separate honest experience from exaggeration or fiction. Now, most of the strange things I personally saw or heard in the mountains could be attributed to ordinary wildlife. I never encountered anything that my logical mind could not explain. But I was never arrogant enough to insist that unexplained creatures could not exist. In our community, Dogman was blamed for many disturbing incidents. People spoke of something killing chickens, attacking hikers, trying to force its way through doors, or simply creating trouble around remote farms. Other stories described it stalking people who lived deep in the woods, staring through windows at night, and sometimes even appearing to protect isolated residents from unwanted visitors. Many of the people telling these stories enjoyed the attention that came with the frightening tale. A few, however, were different. They did not volunteer their experiences, and they spoke only when someone asked them directly. My grandfather was one of those people. He was a practical and highly skeptical man. He questioned stories about cryptids, ghosts, spirits, and anything else considered supernatural. He always searched for a logical explanation, and his questions often frustrated whoever was telling the story. That was one reason I trusted him. He was the person the grandchildren went to when frightening stories became too real. So one day when I was still young, I asked whether he had ever seen anything he just could not explain. He remained silent for so long that I thought he had not heard me. Then he began to tell me about the early days after he and my grandmother purchased the family homestead. Neighbors had warned him that monsters roamed those part of the mountains. My grandmother found the stories unsettling, but my grandfather dismissed them. He assumed people were encountering black bears, bobcats, or other familiar animals. So about 2 months after they moved in, he watched a mother bear and her cub cross the mountain behind the house. That sight seemed to confirm his opinion. But then one late night, something began pounding and scratching at the front door. My grandfather retrieved his shotgun and looked through the window, trying to identify the visitor, and all he could see was a massive black shadow cast across the porch. Expecting a bear or perhaps a person, he unlocked the door and pulled it open. What stood outside was neither. He described an enormous humanoid approximately 6 feet tall, maybe 6 feet 5 inches tall. It stood slightly hunched behind the porch roof. Its arms were extraordinarily long, and its knees extended below its hands extended below its bent knees. Those knees appeared to bend opposite the direction of a human's. The creature's body was covered in thick, dense black hair. An overpowering odor surrounded it, a combination of wet dog and raw sewage. Its head was the feature he remembered most clearly. He said it looked like the head of a German shepherd attached to a huge, hairy, human-shaped body. And for a moment, the two of them simply stared at one another. The creature tilted its head and looked down at him. To my grandfather's expression seemed to contain fear and confusion. He raised the shotgun. Before he could fire directly at it, the creature turned and fled. My grandfather discharged the weapon as it ran and believed the shot struck the back of its right calf. The howl that followed terrified him more than anything else he had experienced. He rushed inside, bolted the door, and listened as the cries moved deeper into the mountains, growing fainter until the forest became silent again. But according to my grandmother, that was not the end of it. He swore that the creature, but according to my grandfather, that was not the end of it. He swore that the creature returned to the house on several later occasions. He would hear her dragging the injured lady across the porch as it approached the same front door. It never again attempted to force its way inside, and it sniffed around the entrance. It released a low growl and eventually disappeared back into the darkness. Now, my grandfather told me that many things in the mountains could injure or frighten a person. But nothing he encountered was as terrifying as the being that stood on the porch that night. Now, he warned me never to search for it because if I found it, I would deeply regret doing so. He has been gone for many years, but I still believe what he told me. His testimony may never prove the existence of Dogman or anyone else. To me, however, it remains the most convincing, unexplained story I have ever heard. Now, that account is compelling not because it provides physical proof, but because of the character of the person who reportedly told it. The grandfather was remembered as a family skeptic, a man most likely to challenge the extraordinary claim rather than encourage it. Yet, even a sincere witness can misidentify an animal, especially at night and under stress. A bear on a porch may appear humanoid. Fear can distort proportions, and memories can change across half a century. But what happens when a similar descriptions no longer belong to one family or one night? What happens when reports accumulate across decades and the alleged creature appears to combine the anatomy of several known predators? That brings us to one of Kentucky's strangest regional cryptids, Bearilla. For decades, unsettling stories have emerged from the deep woods in the isolated hollows of Kentucky involving a towering creature known locally as Bearilla. Reports extending back to at least the 1940s describe violent encounters, unusual footprints, and a beast seemingly composed of most intimidating characteristics of both bear and wolf. Skeptics regard Bearilla as folklore, exaggeration, or ordinary animal distorted through fear. Supporters point to the recurring similarities in accounts separated by time and geography. Witnesses generally describe Bearilla as a massive, broad-shouldered. Its huge, muscular torso resembles a bear, while its head reportedly possesses the long, pointed muzzle of a wolf or other large canine. Accounts also mention powerful forelimbs, prominent teeth, and long dagger-like claws. The creature is sometimes seen on all fours, but witnesses claim it can rise on two legs and reach an estimated height of 6 to 7 foot. Now, according to Kentucky cryptid researcher Ron Coffey, the earliest known encounter occurred during the 1940s, and in that case, a young boy was reportedly attacked while playing along the creek bank in rural Kentucky. The child was injured and badly shaken. Coffey had said that the description the boy provided contained many of the same characteristics found in later Bearilla reports. Now, Coffey argues that decades of similar testimony should not be dismissed as collective imagination. Individual witnesses can certainly make mistakes, but he believes recurring descriptions, especially those attributed to people with no known connection to one another, deserves serious consideration. Now, Bearilla is most strongly associated with eastern and central Kentucky, but comparable creatures have reportedly been seen in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and parts of Canada. Many encounters occur in similar environments: forested creek beds, remote farmlands, isolated roads, and heavily wooded hollows far from concentrated human activity. Some witnesses report more than an unusual physical form. They describe a sudden and overwhelming sensation of fear, occasionally experienced before the creature is fully visible. That response may be nothing more than an instinctive alarm produced by an encounter with a large predator. Others wonder whether it suggests something more unusual. Coffey also claims to have recovered possible physical evidence. During a winter investigation in Bath County, Kentucky, he discovered a large footprint impression and preserved it in plaster. Now, according to Coffey, the track did not display the expected anatomy of a bear or wolf. Its proportions and toe ranges appear unusual, and he believes they correspond with witness descriptions of Bearilla's feet. One disputed footprint cannot establish the existence of an unknown species. Without independent analysis, additional tracks, biological material, or a specimen, the case remains interesting but inconclusive. Now, some residents are openly skeptical. John Pugh, who lived in the area, dismissed the sightings as hoaxes. He pointed to the lack of attacks on his own animals. His chickens and roosters moved freely and were never disturbed, while the property remained quiet at night. In infused view, a 7-foot canine predator could not inhabit a region without repeatedly killing livestock or leaving other obvious signs. Now, his objection to raises a fundamental question. If Bearilla is a flesh and blood animal, what does it eat, and why does it leave so little evidence? Now, Coffey counters that legends rarely survive for generations without some factual core. The absence of bones or remains, he argues, did not necessarily disprove the creature's existence if the population is exceptionally small, elusive, and intelligent. He also has entertained the possibility that the phenomenon might not be entirely biological, a suggestion placing Bearilla among cryptids that appear suddenly, behave unpredictably, and disappear without leaving conventional traces. Now, investigators attempted to locate a surviving witness connected to one of the older Kentucky encounters, but the last known individual had died before a new interview could be conducted. Now, the Bearilla story consequently rests upon old testimony, secondhand recollections, and a controversial footprint cast. Is Bearilla an undisclosed predator, a misidentified bear, a Kentucky variation of Dogman, or simply a frightened identity imposing upon unrelated events? No definitive answer has ever emerged. But in the isolated hollows and creek bottoms where the reports began, the story has never completely disappeared. If even one witness encountered what was described, then something large, powerful, and unidentified may still be moving through Kentucky's backwoods. Now, Bearilla reports occupy an uncertain space between regional folklore and the possibility of an unknown animal. The next account enters similar territory, but with an important difference. It involves two encounters near the same lake, apparently occurring during the same era. The witnesses did not compare their experiences until decades later. Yet, each described a towering creature covered in white hair and walking upright on two legs. Now, the witness writes, when I was growing up, my family owned a cabin on a lake in rural Martin County, Kentucky, deep in the Appalachian region. The area had been more heavily developed in recent years, but it was extremely remote during my childhood. There were fewer houses, fewer visitors, and vast stretches of forest where a person could feel completely isolated. Now, my family sometimes held picnics in a large field bordering a farmer's property. Now, on one particular day, we selected a spot near the crest of the steep hill. And at the bottom, the field ended at the tree line of extensive forest. Now, I was too young to remember everything that followed, so much of this account comes from what my parents and sister have later told me. As we sat eating, my father heard a series of tremendous banging sounds coming from the bottom of the hill. The impact seemed to originate where the open field met the woods. They were deliberate and repetitive, nothing like branches falling or trees moving in the wind. My father walked to the crest to investigate, and at the tree line below, he saw an enormous white creature standing upright on two legs. Now, according to him, the creature was picking up large logs, lifting them above its head and striking or throwing them against standing trees. Each impact produced the noise we had been hearing. My father called my mother over, and she observed it as well. Whatever they saw disturbed enough that the picnic ended immediately. They packed their belongings and took us back to the cabin. Now, my parents are rational, level-headed people. They are not drawn to sensational claims and never tried to convince anyone that monsters lived in the Kentucky woods. They rarely discussed the incident, and perhaps because few people wanted to announce that they may have even seen a Bigfoot. For years, it remained an uncomfortable family memory. Then, decades later, we were celebrating Christmas with my aunt and her family. They had also spent considerable time at a cabin on the same lake. And now, while we traded old memories, my aunt mentioned an unbelievable experience that she had shared only with my uncle. She used to make wild blackberry jam and would go out during the season to collect berries. On one trip, she noticed what appeared to be a bear feeding on blackberries in the distance. The sight frightened her, but it remained far enough away that she continued picking while carefully watching it. But then the animal stood up. When it rose onto two legs, she saw that its body was covered in white hair. It did not immediately drop back down onto all fours. Instead, it walked upright into the forest and disappeared. And as soon as she finished the story, my family revealed what had occurred during our picnic. Everyone was stunned. My aunt had never discussed her experience with my parents, yet she described the same basic creature, something enormous, covered in thick white hair and capable of walking on two legs. The encounters also appeared to have occurred during approximately the same period in the late 1980s and in the same general area surrounding the lake. Now, I later searched for similar reports and discovered that other people had allegedly seen unusual creatures in the region during that era. Now, one man was reportedly so convinced that he had encountered Bigfoot that he devoted much of his life to finding it again. He eventually claimed to have observed three creatures together. Two were large and brown. The third possessed a thick white coat, an appearance remarkably like the being my parents and aunt described independently. I cannot confirm that man's story, and I still do not know what to believe about my own family's experience. The rational part of my mind says it probably was not a Bigfoot. A bear standing upright could explain some of the sightings, particularly at the distance. An animal with unusual pale fur might appear even stranger under poor viewing conditions. But those explanations do not account for everything. My father described the animal standing upright while manipulating heavy logs and striking them against trees. My mother confirmed what he saw. And during a separate encounter, my aunt watched what she initially believed was a bear rise on the two legs and walk upright into the forest. None of them considered the behavior normal for a bear. All three insisted the creature was covered in thick white hair, and my aunt knew nothing about my parents' experience until many years later. Now, perhaps they all misidentified an animal. Perhaps time changed their memory in similar ways. Or perhaps something genuinely unusual was roaming the forest around Martin County Lake during the late 1980s. I cannot prove what they witnessed. I know only what they remained convinced that it was not a bear. And after hearing their independent accounts, I don't know how to explain it away at all. Now, a large white animal walking upright could represent a bear with an uncommon coat, an unidentified primate, or a memory reshaped through time. But pale humanoid creatures appear elsewhere in Kentucky's testimony, and the next case is considerably more violent. It began with an unexplained death of a hunting dog. It continued with something striking a camper before dawn. It ended in an open field where two men claimed a 9-foot white creature charged directly toward them. Now, in July 2004, friends Dakota Cheeks and Ricky Joyce encountered a remote section of Breckinridge County, Kentucky for a hunting trip. Ricky's grandparents owned a cabin at the foot of approximately 100 acres of dense timber, and a property became their base camp. The trip took a disturbing turn on the first morning. When one of Ricky's dogs failed to return after being called, the men searched for her. They discovered the animal dead in a ditch. Now, according to Dakota, the head's dog appeared to have been violently twisted. He knew of no local predator he believed capable of killing an animal in that manner. A coyote seemed too small, and he was unaware of the bears in the immediate area. The discovery was especially troubling because Dakota and Rick had already heard unexplained noises coming from the top of the mountain. They described a combination of growls and screams unlike any animal that they could identify. Suspecting a connection between the sounds and the dog's death, they climbed onto the four-wheelers and traveled toward the hilltop. They searched the far side of the property, an isolated area without established trails. To make their movements easier to track, they circled an open field and left visible tire marks, allowing them to identify ground they had already covered. They spent hours searching for footprints, disturbed vegetation, and some other indication of a large predator, but they found nothing. Eventually, the men returned to the camper. Almost immediately heard movement outside. Something appeared to be walking around the campsite while remaining beyond their view. At approximately 5 o'clock the following morning, the dogs began barking and then ran into the darkness. Moments later, something struck the camper. The attack erupted with tremendous force. Dakota described hearing pressure against the side of the structure as the material in the metal supports bent and creaked. The men could not see what was outside, but they could hear it moving around them and repeatedly slamming into the shelter. Then, without warning, the assault ended. Whatever had surrounded the camper appeared to walk away, leaving the campsite silent. Now, once the men believed it was safe, they armed themselves, mounted the four-wheelers, and began another search. They continued through the day and into the evening. Just after dusk, they crossed across the cemetery and entered an open field. There, Ricky noticed something standing in the distance. At first, he believed it was a tree. The figure was extremely tall, almost motionless, and slightly hunched. As they drew near, the men realized the pale form was not part of the landscape. It was alive. They described an enormous white creature with unusually long arms held away from its body. Its hands appeared to end in extended talon-like claws. It stood upright on two legs and was far too large to be human. Dakota and Ricky estimated that it reached at least 9 feet in height. When the creature noticed them, it released a deep, gut-wrenching growl. Then it charged. The men accelerated away on their four-wheelers and fired their weapons while racing toward Ricky's grandparents' cabin. They did not know where any shot struck the creature. They did not see it again that night. Now, Dakota later identified the entity as the legendary Sheepsquatch, a cryptid most often associated with Appalachia. Descriptions vary, but Sheepsquatch is generally portrayed as a large, pale creature combining a powerful humanoid or ape-like body with features associated with sheep or goats. Some reports mention horns, hooves, claws, or an overpowering odor. It's frequently depicted as muscular, aggressive, and capable of walking upright. Now, for Ricky, the most terrifying aspect of the incident was not only the creature's size or aggression, it was a complete absence of a familiar frame of reference. In most dangerous situations, a person understands the threat and can decide how to respond. In that field, the men could not identify what was pursuing them. The encounter permanently changed Ricky's view of the unknown. Before it happened, he placed no faith in myths, wives' tales, or stories of mysterious creatures. Afterwards, he became convinced that things may exist, which human beings have yet to identify. Other people connected to Breckinridge County have reported unusual animals. Resident Susan No described seeing an upright sheep-like creature while driving home one evening and later producing a drawing that she believed was what she had witnessed. Dakota's aunt and uncle, Stacy and Wayman Morgan, also participated in the case, gaining wider attention. Dakota, Ricky, Susan, Stacy, and Wayman were interviewed for the dramatization of the Travel Channel series, Monsters and Mysteries in America. Now, Dakota and Ricky continued searching for evidence after the encounter. They never established what killed the dog, struck the camper, or charged them in the field. To the two men, however, it was not a campfire tale or a distant Appalachian legend. It was something that they encountered face to face, something enormous, pale, and violently territorial that emerged from the Kentucky wilderness and then vanished without an explanation. Now, the first half of our journey has centered on creatures that appear physically, beings that leave footprints, handle logs, strike buildings, injure animals, and move through the forest like undiscovered predators. But Kentucky's unexplained traditions do not consist only of monsters. Some encounters feel less like attacks and more like brief glimpses into a hidden world. They carry no growl, pursuit, or obvious threat. Instead, they leave the witness with a sense of wonder and the unsettling possibility that folklore may sometimes step out of the old stories and into the ordinary daylight. Our next witness believes a large insect was hovering beside her in a garden. When she finally turned to look, she claimed to see a tiny man with pointed ears and wings. The witness writes, "Many years ago, I was dating a man who shared my enthusiasm for hiking and primitive camping. He wanted me to visit two close friends who lived in Kentucky on approximately 150 acres near Daniel Boone National Forest. I will call the couple Dan and Gina. They lived in an off-grid cabin that Dan had constructed himself. Around it was a cleared home site where Gina grew fruit and vegetables. A transparent creek flowed from a cave further up on the property, bordering and dividing sections of the land. The water appeared so clean that it could be consumed directly from the stream. Now, after the long drive, we arrived, and Gina immediately took me through the gardens. The property was lush and alive, bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds moving among the plants. The entire place felt protected, almost sacred. Dan and Gina seemed less like owners than caretakers entrusted with the land. And as Gina showed me crops growing near the tree line, something began darting through my peripheral vision on the right. I assumed it was an unusually large insect. It repeatedly approached and withdrew. And although bees do not normally frighten me, its persistence made me uncomfortable. Finally, I turned my head and looked directly at it. Hovering near my shoulder, it was a tiny man. He had inky black hair, pointed ears, and clothing that appeared to be made from deep green leaves. His wings moved with extraordinary speed and produced a sound resembling the wings of a hummingbird. I blinked several times, certain that exhaustion from the drive had affected my vision. The small figure responded by raising its hands beside its ears, wiggling its fingers, and blowing a raspberry at me. Then he flew away. I turned toward Gina, but I had only just met her and was afraid that she'd think I was irrational. She saw the expression on my face and began to laugh softly. And then she asked, in her gentle Kentucky accent, whether I had seen one of their fairies. She said they must have liked me and predicted that I would see fairy lights at night and rings in the grass the following morning. I remained stunned. I had experienced unusual things before, but I'd never seen anything I could have identified as a fairy, gnome, or any other magical being. That night, we sat on the porch surrounded by flower-covered trellises and listened to the forest. And after a while, Gina tapped my arm and pointed toward the far edge of the cleared yard. Tiny lights glowed in the grass. They did not behave like fireflies. Each maintained a steady illumination as they rose into the air and then descended. Up and down they moved, again and again, for approximately an hour. We watched without speaking. The property felt sealed inside a world of its own. My boyfriend and I slept outside in the tent. I woke early, before anyone else, and walked barefoot across the dew-covered grass. There, I discovered 3 perfect circles where the vegetation had been pressed flat. The rest of the visit carried the same atmosphere. We hiked to the cave from which the creek emerged and ventured toward the deeper interior. Marks and figures covered the portions of the stone. Dan believed that they were petrographs left by indigenous people long ago. He told us that drumming and chanting could sometimes be heard inside the cave after dark. We did not return at night. Entering again felt disrespectful, almost like trespassing into a place that did not belong to us. Now, while inside, I had sensed unseen attention as though hundreds of eyes were watching. Many years later, I still think about Dan and Gina. I wonder whether they remain on the land, tending the gardens, guarding the cave, and protecting whatever hidden beings may share the property with them. Now, a skeptical interpretation offers many possibilities. The tiny figure may have been an insect transported by fatigue and expectation. The lights could have been from some insects or another natural source. The circles may have resulted from wildlife, weather, or ordinary patterns in the grass. Yet, the witness remembers the events not as separate curiosities, but as parts of one coherent experience, a landscape in which the boundary between folklore and reality briefly seemed permeable. That boundary now darkens again. On a country road in western Kentucky, 2 men in the same vehicle saw a towering figure beside the pavement. Neither spoke until they had passed it. Later, when they separated and asked to draw what they had seen, both produced the same disturbing details. A black central body, red eyes, and enormous wings fading from white to yellow and to red. Now, the witness, identified as Drew, writes, roughly 10 years ago, before I recorded this account, my former husband and I were visiting friends in western Kentucky. That evening, my ex-husband, Josh, and our friend's husband, Zach, left to rent movies from a local video store. The region is composed of small towns separated by farmland, woods, and long country roads. Main routes generally have streetlights, but the back roads can be completely dark. Zach chose one of those roads because he wanted to show Josh a house that he had been helping to build. I knew the route well, extended for approximately 20 miles. My grandparents lived nearby, and one of my childhood friends had lived directly along it. I spent time in those woods while growing up and experienced several things I considered strange. The area was not known as haunted, and I eventually attributed those childhood memories to an impressionable imagination. Now, as Zach and Josh approached the curved section of the road, they saw an enormous figure standing just beyond the pavement. Josh estimated it was approximately 7 feet tall. Because the men were seated low inside a Dodge Neon, he later admitted that the perspective may have been distorted by the apparent height. Even so, both agreed that the figure towered over the vehicle. Now, neither man said a word until they had passed it. Another vehicle approached from the opposite direction, and as the driver reached the same location, the vehicle's brake lights suddenly illuminated. Josh and Zach believe the driver may have reacted to whatever stood beside the road. Zach turned around at the first available opportunity. Only then did the two men begin asking each other what they had seen. They returned to the curb, but the figure had disappeared. There were no street lights, so they stopped and searched the roadside with flashlights. They found nothing and saw no indication of where it had gone. When they arrived back at the house, both men were unusually quiet and visibly shaken. Each insisted that the other should explain what had happened. They eventually described encountering something beside the road, but we did not immediately ask for the physical details. My friend and I separated them and asked each man to draw a figure independently. We wanted to know whether the descriptions would match without either witness influencing each other. The drawings were remarkably similar. One man drew only the upper part of the entity while the other sketched the complete figure. Both depicted a black central body with red eyes. Josh said it seemed to have no visible feet and may have been floating above the ground. Zach could not remember whether it looked towards its feet. His attention was captured by the enormous wings. Both witnesses illustrated the same unusual colorations. Wings were white near the top, faded into yellow, and then red. Their reported movement was stranger still. They did not flap vertically at the wings of the bird. Instead, they folded inward toward the center of the body and then extended outward in a repeated motion. Josh and I discussed the encounter for years. He never changed its essential details. Sometime later, Zach suffered a traumatic brain injury in a motorcycle accident. He had been riding alone. A witness reportedly said the vehicle left the road as though Zach had suddenly reacted to something crossing in front of him. Because of the severity of his injuries, Zach could not communicate what happened immediately before the crash. There was no evidence connecting the accident with the winged figure, and the two events may be completely unrelated. Still, I sometimes wonder whether Zach saw the creature again, or whether its first appearance represented a warning that none of us understood. Whatever the men encountered, it affected them deeply. Both people traveled on a familiar road independently, describing the same towering, red-eyed figure with strange colored wings. A passing motorist may have reacted to it as well. But when Josh and Zach returned with flashlight, the roadside was empty. The winged figure has vanished into the western Kentucky darkness. Now, that eventually evokes comparisons with Mothman and other winged humanoid traditions, but the unusual coloration and inward movement of the wings distinguish it from most familiar descriptions. It also introduces an important theme found in many unexplained encounters. The effect does not end when the entity disappears. Witnesses may become afraid of roads they once enjoyed, woods they once explored, and even the darkness just beyond their own windows. For the next witness, that fear began inside an abandoned building. It later followed him into a neighborhood farm, and he believes into a narrow strip of trees behind his home. The witness, identified as C, writes, I have never personally seen the Mothman, but two encounters with human-like creatures convinced me that such beings may exist. The first occurred 8 or 9 years ago when several friends and I explored abandoned properties around northern Kentucky. One night, we made a third visit to an old farmhouse south of Cincinnati. A fallen tree had split the house down the middle and continued across the property toward a cluster of barns and storage buildings. Inside the final outbuilding, we found a large hole opening into an attic. Almost immediately, something began moving above us. At first, it sounded like a small animal. Then the scurrying stopped. We discussed which one of us should look through the opening, and as soon as we did, the movement began again, louder and more frantic than before. One friend approached the hole and said he could see animal-like eyes staring back at him. We panicked and ran. We did not capture the creature on camera, but I saw its silhouette perched on a fallen tree only a few feet away. Its form appeared disturbingly human. That glimpse changed how I live. I once enjoyed driving on dark country roads, and now I avoid them. People sometimes ask why I look toward the ground when I walk. The truth is, I'm terrified of what I might see if I look up. The second encounter happened at a friend's home in my own neighborhood. Across a small farm belonging to his neighbor, he noticed human-like figures standing along the crest of a hill. It stared directly at us. Then it turned and walked away upright on two legs, and as it moved, it continued looking back until it disappeared over the ridge. More recently, I have heard something in the narrow strip of woods behind my house. At times, it sounds as if an animal is being eaten. Whatever is producing the noise does not resemble a coyote. I know what coyotes sound like and have compared the noise with recordings. I could not identify it. The distances involved disturbed me most. The silhouette in the tree may have been no more than 6 feet away. The figure on the ridge was approximately 60 feet from us. Whatever is moving behind my house could be only 20 feet away. The next time I hear it, I intend to investigate. If you do not hear from me again, assume the worst. Well, we hope the witness resisted the urge to enter those woods alone. Curiosity is understandable, but darkness, uneven terrain, frightened wildlife, and unknown people are real dangers regardless of what causes the sounds. Now, the final account leaves familiar ground almost completely. It began on a farm near Falmouth in November 1991. A worker entered the woods expecting to confront hunters who had trespassed onto his property. Instead, he reported a small gray being, a reptilian guardian, a towering Bigfoot-like creature, telepathic communication, an illuminated doorway, and a transition from afternoon to night that seemed to happen in an instant. Now, the witness identified as M writes me, this happened in November 1991 on a 160-acre farm near Falmouth, Kentucky. It was early afternoon, and I was eating lunch with a friend when someone reported that hunters had entered the property without permission. Now, because I worked on the farm, I finished eating, retrieved my gun, and followed the fence line toward the woods. I intended to approach the trespassers quietly and confront them before they could leave. I had been searching for approximately 45 minutes to an hour when something stepped from behind a tree. Believing I had found one of the hunters, I aimed my gun and shouted, "Friend or foe?" The figure standing in front of me did not appear human. It was approximately 3.5 feet tall and gray in color. It stood frozen, pointing my weapon and trying to understand what I was seeing. Then I failed to communicate directly in my mind. No words were spoken aloud, but I somehow understood that the being was young, female, and frightened. I also received the impression that she intended to run toward a small knoll nearby. A moment later, she did exactly that. The being turned and ran up the hill. I followed. When I reached the area, there was a flash of light and what appeared to be a doorway materialized in front of me. The opening was approximately 4 foot wide and 8 feet tall. Brilliant light filled its interior. Within it, I could see the small being I had followed. Her appearance now seemed different, as though she were wearing a tight-fitting black suit. Then I detected rapid movement from the corner of my left eye. Something was running toward me. I turned and found myself facing a second entity, a lizard-like humanoid standing between 5 to 6 feet tall. It carried a long staff in one hand. Its body appeared reptilian, but the face looked more like that of an insect. Its eyes were blue. Again, information seemed to enter my thoughts without audible speech. I felt that this entity was either a young female's father or some kind of guardian. It suddenly approached me, and I believe it considered me a threat. Before I could respond, the third creature appeared on my right. This being stood 7 to 8 foot tall and was covered in brown hair. It resembled common descriptions of Bigfoot. I had not heard a reproach. It seemed to materialize beside us. The hairy creature did not move its mouth, but it heard a clear message in my mind. No, don't hurt him. The reptilian entity stared directly at me. As it did, its blue eyes changed to a brilliant gold yellow. That was when I ran. I remember fleeing, but what happened next is impossible for me to explain. In an instant, I found myself standing alone in the woods. It was no longer afternoon. Night had fallen. I remained there in shock, trying to understand how much time had passed. The entities, the illuminated doorway, and the strange light had disappeared. The forest was silent. Eventually, I returned to the farmhouse. Another farmhand told me that the people had been searching for it because they believed I was lost. I offered no explanation, told no one about the encounter. More than 3 decades had passed. I had never seen the small gray being, the reptilian guarding the towering hairy creature, or the doorway of light. I cannot explain what happened or account for what the hours that apparently disappeared. I know only that I entered those woods expecting to confront trespassing hunters and instead encountered something that challenged everything I believed possible. So we had 8 reports, 8 different confrontations from the unknown. Some may have natural explanations. Kentucky is home to dense forests, deep caves, isolated farms, and wildlife capable of startling even experienced outdoorsmen. Darkness alters distance. Fear magnifies size. Memory fills gaps, and stories can acquire new details as they pass from one generation to the next. But natural explanations must still account for the specific testimony. A skeptical grandfather claimed a canine humanoid returned repeatedly to his porch. A researcher preserved a footprint he believed belonged to no known bear or wolf. 3 relatives independently described a white-haired creature near the same Martin County lake. 2 hunters reported a 9-foot entity after something attacked their camp. A visitor to an isolated homestead claims she watched a tiny winged man hover beside her. 2 men produced similar drawings of a red-eyed roadside figure. Another witness described humanoids appearing first in an abandoned building and later near the neighborhood. And a farm worker claimed that a simple search for trespassers ended with telepathy, multiple entities, and a doorway of light in missing time. These accounts do not all describe the same kind of phenomena. Some suggest undiscovered animals. Others resemble traditional spirits, fairies, extraterrestrials. Cryptids are beings for which our familiar categories may not be adequate. Perhaps that variety is the most important part of the mystery. Kentucky wilderness in these stories is not merely a place where unknown creatures hide. It is a boundary landscape where witnesses believe the ordinary world briefly opened into something else. Whether that opening exists in the forest, in human perception, or somewhere between the two remains unanswered. Folklore is not evidence by itself. Neither is sincerity. Honest people can be mistaken, and extraordinary stories require more than conviction before they can become established facts. Yet, folklore also preserves experience. Beneath the embellishment, uncertainty, and fear, there may remain that one Kentucky witness called other than 10%, the small portion of a story that refuses to disappear and keeps us returning to the mystery. So, what walks through the hollows after dark? What watches from the ridge lines, circles above the back roads, or moves behind the trees where the headlights cannot reach him? Are these encounters misidentifications shaped by Kentucky's rich storytelling traditions? Are rare animals responsible for some reports? Are witnesses experiencing psychological or environmental effects we do not yet understand? Are hidden among the legends are a few accounts exactly what the witnesses say they are? For now, the answers remain somewhere beyond the porch light, across the creek, inside the tree line, and deep within the unexplained Kentucky night. So please subscribe to Phantoms of Monsters Radio, activate the notifications, and share this presentation with others interested in the unexplained. If you have experienced something unexplained in Kentucky or elsewhere, I encourage you to document every detail you encounter or remember. Even details that initially seem insignificant may become important when compared with other reports, and you can submit your account to Phantoms of Monsters. We will respect witness confidentiality and anonymity when requested. If you send a chat donation this evening, we appreciate your consideration. Your support helps us continue documenting witness testimony, investigating unusual incidents, and preserving these accounts for future research. So let's start the Q&A. Please type your questions in all caps, please. Michelle, do you think the Sheepsquatch ate the dog? Do you know if the dog came back? I don't know. They never say anything about the dog coming back. And honestly, I've heard a lot of Sheepsquatch stories, particularly in Southwest Virginia into Tennessee and over into Kentucky. So that seems to be the area where they're at. It's all in Appalachia. I don't know if he ate the dog or not. I never heard a thing about that. I can't answer that confidently. Michelle, do you think the Fae showed themselves as a way of showing gratitude for them taking care of their land? Maybe, but I guess they were just living the way they live and, not expecting much. But then again, if they show off and that's the way they show their appreciation, I've heard a lot of fairy stories and a lot of little winged being stories over the years. And honestly, I'm not really surprised by it. I have people that have described fairies in different ways, but it always turns out to be very similar in fact. And they are very adamant about what they saw and they experienced. Lala Bright, when something like a Dogman comes right up to a home instead of staying in the woods, do you think it's trying to get inside or trying to make sure the people inside know it's there? Probably both. I think from the accounts I have heard, even locally, that they want people to know that they have their own territory and that, when they show up once in a while or seen once in a while, that may be them giving that type of information. I don't think they really want to cause a ruckus or anything. And if they do, they must have a reason for it. But until now, I don't know of anything that could justify them attacking anyone. Some people have suggested that they just want to mark their territory. And just like the one account I had in Maryland where that upright canine busted into the police officer's home. I think that was a territorial thing because he lived along a restricted area for wildlife. So I think that may have been what happened. Lala Bright, when different members of the same family have encounters, do you ever wonder whether the creature is returning to the people rather than just location? Could be. Yeah, I mean, if they're used to certain people being around for whatever reason, if it's something that's been a generational thing or they're just used to these humans, and if they're treated well, sure, they may come back for that. Michelle, do you think so many of these creatures are described as smelling like trash, death, and even musty earth? What do you think that is? Well, they're animals. They don't take a bath for the most part. And, they're out in the woods and everything, and dirt accumulates, sweat and grime accumulates. When I used to go bear hunting, I used to go deer hunting. Deer usually keep pretty clean. Bear, not so much though. So, it could be just, that they just don't groom that well, I guess. Dagnama, do you believe that many cryptids can move in and out of our dimension without requiring portals? I think most of them do. I think most cryptids are supernatural beings. I mean, I'll probably say that till the day I die. I've had encounter reports sent to me for years that suggested that these things are not indigenous beings. Sure, I do believe there are some Bigfoot that live in areas where they are indigenous, in groups, family groups, and such. But for the most part, I think they and others are not necessarily time travelers, but dimensional travelers through gateways or portals of some type. Until I'm proven otherwise, that's what I'm going to believe, because that's just the only thing at this point now that makes sense to me. Jose Sanchez, are most cryptids usually reported to have the same stenchy smells, or does one outweigh the other in that category? Bigfoot may be a prime candidate, so I've heard. I've heard it from all types. I've heard people have had Bigfoot encounters where they didn't smell a thing. Early on, that seemed to be the trend, and everybody seemed to be describing these smelly, hairy giants. But I've heard it for several types of cryptids, even Mothman. We've had that ammonia smell pop up with the Mothman encounters, especially in and around Chicago. That ammonia smell that seems to resonate when the human goes to an area where this thing had been at. So I think they all have some type of signature sent to them. Maybe not as good as others, but I think they all possess it. Lala, Bright, how rare are white or very pale Bigfoot reports? And have you ever found any pattern where those particular sightings happen? Why are they there? Different colored Bigfoot. Okay. There are certain areas in Pennsylvania where there have been multiple seen. Allegheny State Forest, the area around Portage, Pennsylvania. There have been several around a reservoir up in that area. In this area, in the state of Pennsylvania, that's the only two areas I know where there have been multiple sightings of white beings. I've heard of several down in the Ozarks. Even the Sheepsquatch thing, where people have said that they are white in color. Look, any animal that is white or is pale, unless they're ferocious, they don't stand a good chance of reaching adulthood, because they're very easily seen, and if they don't have a way of defending themselves, a lot of them aren't going to make it. So any type of albino type of creature, or that's normally a dark color or has a lighter color to it, they're going to be threatened, because they're easy prey. They're easy to be found. So, but there are two areas I know in Pennsylvania, and I imagine there are many others in other states as well. Jose Sanchez, extraterrestrials often been said to smell like sulfur, but cryptids have also been. Maybe they are related. Pale crawlers, I don't know. That sulfur smell could be from a lot of different things. It could be natural or from something else. Occasionally, I will hear about other humanoids having a sulfur smell. Cryptids, more like that sulfur smell that comes with the garbage smell, decomposing. A sulfur smell may show up, or even if it's going through garbage or other decomposing items. That sulfur smell does show up a lot of different things. Demon Tooth, I'm surprised you didn't mention the Pope Lick monster. Well, I'll be doing others. I've talked about the Pope Lick monster many, many times before in other presentations. So I'm just picking reports from my archive that I believe are interesting. And the Pope Lick monster has been talked about for many, many decades. So might be another one down the road. Michelle, do you think mountain areas hold so many of the cryptid beings? It could, but I guess it depends on the area itself. The Appalachians are pretty unique because they're very thick. They have a lot of really steep ridges, a lot of places that humans and other predators won't even go into. Um, so it's not surprising that there are a lot of sightings along the Appalachian Trail in particular because it's a designated trail and they're used to humans coming through there. So if a creature's in there, a Bigfoot may see something and they may accidentally be seen by a human. Um, I think most mountains are pretty protected for unknown animals or for any animal for that matter. The Sierras very high, very rugged. A lot of creatures won't go into that terrain. So yeah, I mean, taking those two examples, yeah, they're definitely advantages to being in that area. Winnie Niece, could it be a curse? Could it be a curse individuals? Bible talking about King Nebuchadnezzar. Islam talks about it. Many religions speak about it. Yeah, I mean, if you want to go deep into that and use it as part of the beliefs, your belief system, or even the possible stories and tales and legends of older civilizations, yeah, I guess it could be, but I try to be a little more practical, though. In some cases, it just doesn't come out that way because I do have opinions about a lot of these things. Um, but it could be. I mean, it very well could be. We don't know everything yet. We definitely don't know everything. I mean, I'm quite sure we're going to learn eventually some very interesting facts about cryptids, extraterrestrials, and other beings that we just don't understand. Might take a while, but I think we're gonna learn something eventually. Can Squatch, any reports of ghost sightings from the 1700s, 1800s of Kentucky of pioneers and indigenous tribes? Yeah, I've got a few. I'll have to dig those out for a specific show. There's a lot of historical stuff that comes out of those eastern hills of Kentucky and into the plains area. So yeah, we'll have to dig those out at some point. Jose Sanchez, a cryptids ever been reported to have been somehow involved with technology, or are they more primitive in that sense? Difficult question. Sorry. I don't know. There's a lot of conjecture about cryptids and extraterrestrials or um, other beings that may not be of our earth plane. Um, it to this point is a lot of rumor, but there's a lot of things that pop up once in a while where people will recognize some type of association with these creatures and with these entities. Um, I do believe that there is an extraterrestrial, ultra terrestrial, non-terrestrial connection between us cryptids and these beings. There may be a very fine line, but I think over the years and some of the stuff that has popped up in our for our perusal, I think there tends to be some things that may actually be unexplained that may add a connection to that. But it's something that we just got to keep documenting and keeping in our research and continue to look at and try, if we get new counts, try to see if we can make an association with it. Jose Sanchez, any recent giant man sightings lately? Is that giant? Haven't heard of it in a long time. I don't know. I mean, I haven't heard of anything. If giants was what you're talking about, I haven't heard any other than people seeing things on mountains and stuff and thinking they're giants. And I don't really talk about giants in particular, but occasionally something will pop up that'll seem a bit interesting and has some unexplained reason as to why people saw it and how it reacted and such. So that'll bring that up. But who knows? I don't know a whole lot about the giant tales, but there occasionally one will come my way. Squatch, roll of caves in Kentucky. Were there any more reports of reptilians than the one mentioned tonight? That's all I have for now. I probably have some back in the archives. But as far as reptilians in Kentucky, I don't really hear a lot about that. Other areas in particular, more so down further south into the Ozarks, Arkansas, especially Missouri. Not so much in Kentucky. Jose Sanchez, have you heard of any recent Goatman sightings lately? It's been a while. Yeah, I haven't heard of anything other than what I've written about. Those are older cases, and there has not been anything new that really popped up with any decent testimony that that we can identify as a goat man. I think a lot of these things bleed into each other. I mean, could it be something Dogman, Bigfoot, a human? I don't know. I guess depends where they saw it at, and if there's any legend or any lore about something like that being there, or people have seen it and reported it. Got to take a lot of things in consideration. But no, I haven't heard much at all, if anything, recently. Jose Sanchez, I know this is different, but have shadow people ever actually been heard? I had one encounter that I didn't work on it, of one of the family members in this home that had shadow beings would constantly hear chattering, like people talking. But I never, even from what I read and looked at, I never associated that with the shadow beings. I think it was a separate haunting in here in the location. They're very silent. They don't say or make much noise at all. They really don't. And if you have heard that and you have an account, feel free to send it to me. Sir Wolf, how long can you do a reptilian mantid show? Yeah, I have in the past. I'll do it again. Okay, folks. Well, this went a long way tonight. So, again, I want to thank you for showing up and for joining me this evening. I'm grateful for your continued interest in and support of the channel. So, until next time, please remain observant. Trust your instincts and remember that the world around us may be far stranger than we've been led to believe. So, again, have a nice evening. Have a great weekend. See you next Friday. Good night.